Hey everybody, my name is Eddie Amin and I'm with an organization called Stand Up for Kids. I can't wait to tell you about New Orleans. I'm going to share some facts with you about New Orleans and I hope you walk away from this impressed with its cultural diversity, its love of music, its deep history, and its amazing food. So here we go. How does New Orleans compare to DC? Let's start there, since you are probably in DC right now when you listen to this. And New Orleans is far away. It's over 1,100 miles by car down the coast of the United States and across from Florida into Alabama, Mississippi, and then finally Louisiana. New Orleans sits in a crescent-shaped part of the state, and so one of its nicknames is the Crescent City. DC is only 61 miles in size, but New Orleans is actually more than 3 times that big. It's at 189 miles. And yet, despite it being 3 times bigger, its population is a lot smaller. That means people are a bit more spread out in New Orleans than they are in DC. DC had just over 700,000 people in its population last July. How many young people live in New Orleans compared to DC? Well, if you look at the number of people under 18, New Orleans actually has more as a percent of its overall population than DC. But just about 1 out of 5 people in DC and in New Orleans is under the age of 18. Both DC and New Orleans have a rich cultural diversity. DC in July 2019 was 47% Black, 41% white, 4% Asian, and 11% Latinx or Hispanic. Compared to New Orleans was 60% Black, 34% white, 3% Asian, and 6% Latinx or Hispanic. One of the things that New Orleans, and some people pronounce it Nolans, or Norlands, is best known for is jazz. It is the birthplace of jazz, and some of the most amazing jazz artists came from there. I encourage you to look up some of these at the end of this exercise today. Let's tune in for the next 10-15 seconds to this jazz performance that I recorded during a visit to New Orleans 2 years ago. I don't know about you, but that makes me want to get up and dance. I can't dance very well, but that music just moves you with its brassiness, its vocals, its forward propelling motion. Even in the rain, New Orleans people are committed to getting their music out there. Music and dancing is such a big part of New Orleans pride that I'm going to bring it up again and again. Something that is unique to New Orleans are second line street parades. And these really can break out at any time. They have a rich tradition of being born right after slavery ended in the late 1800s, at which point small groups of neighbors wanted to support fellow black neighbors who were recently freed to make sure that they had performers for funerals and for weddings. And so street parades became a regular tradition there. And the performers themselves are part of a first line. The reason that second line became a thing is because once these first line performers get going with their dancing, with their costumes, with their, most importantly, their sound, which is usually jazz, a second line of people formed behind them. These could be people who are just going to the store, walking down the street. They see a parade break out and they join in. In the times that I visited New Orleans, I've seen street parades and second lines form for weddings, and just randomly, sometimes on an exit off the highway, a street parade will form. And the culture is such that you really can't help it but stop and celebrate life for what it is. Despite it being tough at times, you're going to get out and make music. Keeping in this tradition of New Orleans, really embracing a slower pace and a kinder and more joyful sound, its motto is "Let the good times roll." And it has the nickname, the Big Easy. So if you ever hear someone say, "I'm going down to the Big Easy," they're talking about New Orleans. And this little patch that I've included here is written in French, since New Orleans has such a large French influence. It says "Let the good times roll" in French. You want to try to pronounce it? Laissez les bons temps rouler. And I hope I got that even half right. So I don't know what you would recommend people see if they came to DC, but something that almost everybody tries to check out when they visit New Orleans as a tourist is the French Quarter. I wonder, when you look at this picture of the French Quarter, if it reminds you of any place in DC. Certainly DC and New Orleans share in common a lot of low-lying buildings, not too tall. The streets of New Orleans, especially in the French Quarter, can be quite narrow, and there's a mix of houses and shops and restaurants and, of course, street performers. The French Quarter is known for having a big nightlife. People like to go out and dance and party late into the night, Bourbon Street being one of the most famous places of all. And if you travel down Bourbon Street or some of those streets far enough, you can see some really amazing jazz clubs that you can just walk right into and listen to great music, or sit outside if you're not old enough and listen to some great tunes out there. So now I want to introduce to you the idea of what it would be like to eat in the city of New Orleans. It is really famous for Louisiana Creole food, borrowing from rich African and American Indian traditions. If I were to cook you a Creole meal, I would start out with a soup, maybe bisque, which is going to be a creamy, milky, rich soup, maybe of a vegetable or perhaps crab base. Or I might give you a gumbo soup, which is going to be brown and much lighter, and yet still containing common vegetables like bell peppers and tomatoes. You're going to absolutely have a sausage or a shrimp in there. And then we'd move into the main course. One of the most famous kinds of Creole foods in New Orleans would be jambalaya. What looks like it's in jambalaya, if you look carefully? I'm sure you can see rice, celery. In this one, you've got both a sausage and shrimp. And then if you have any room left, if you haven't already gained 5 or 10 pounds from this meal, I might offer you beignets. Now, the word looks like it's going to be pronounced beignets, but beignet is got a French Creole sound to it, and what it consists of is fried dough coated with powdered sugar. In many ways, it might remind you of something you would get at a carnival or a donut even. And that would be the start of one of many delicious Creole meals served in Louisiana. One of the things that's very popular about New Orleans is its rich history of voodooism, which is sometimes known as New Orleans voodoo or voodoo Catholicism. Many voodoo practitioners blended the traditions of voodoo that came from West Africa, brought to the United States by people who were enslaved, as well as the strong Catholic tradition that was largely practiced by whites and others in New Orleans. So in this blend, voodoo known to New Orleans was born. It combines worshiping of ancestors as well as rituals that might ward off certain spirits or invite other spirits into our lives, and song and prayer. So when you have Voodooism known to New Orleans, you may have heard of Marie Laveau. She was a famous free black woman during a time of slavery in New Orleans, and people would come to her to have their children raised if they couldn't care for them themselves. She would care for the sick, and especially during the yellow fever pandemic, she cared for many people. She was a strict Catholic, going to church regularly, but also practiced voodooism, and it is believed that lawyers and business people would not do anything in New Orleans without first consulting Marie Laveau. So I've given you just a small sample of New Orleans, covering some of its practices and energy and food and sounds. But I want you to do some homework if you don't mind. One thing you can do is look at a map. Since we can't travel maybe the way that we want to, we can always use maps as a place to imagine and dream about what it would be like to go somewhere else. So I'd like you to look at a map and think about what states you would have to drive through to get to New Orleans. And then if you look even more closely at the map, what places would you like to stop at on the way and why? Now you can get a little bit deeper in comparing DC and New Orleans. I mentioned at least one place in New Orleans that was a must-see for people visiting for the first time. But what is DC to you? What are the 5 places you think that a person must see when they come to DC? I'd like you to answer this for yourself and then ask your friends and family and try to come up with a little guidebook of things that people must do when they come to DC. New Orleans culture thrives on things that you can do for free just by walking, stopping, seeing, smelling, and listening. So I'd like that list for DC to mainly include things that don't cost a dime. And then I want to ask you, what foods do you think are unique to DC and hardly anywhere else? When I moved to DC 10 years ago, many things stood out to me as being unique to DC that I've never heard of or seen anywhere. So what are those things? If you can't come up with a list, you should try to ask your friends and family, maybe some folks that are older and have traveled to other places and have come back to see what makes DC food really irreplaceable. And then finally, if you have a computer or a phone handy, I'd love for you to hear some of the jazz music that has come from New Orleans. So just type in New Orleans jazz and you'll see some pictures of some famous people that have made jazz what it is in the United States, and they either performed at or got their start in New Orleans, Louisiana. Take a listen to a song or two by these musicians and then stop and ask yourself, what music is DC known best for? And how do the sounds between this music, whatever it is that DC is known for, and jazz compare? Can you make any comparisons based on listening to the 2 types of music common to these 2 cities? And if you want bonus points, I encourage you to have some fun. As much as you can socially distance, or with the people in your house, organize a second line parade. Take out anything that can make a sound that you can play music on, whether it is a bucket or a pan or just 2 pencils that you're banging against the side of a table. And see if you can get the people around you to join in. Have a little fun with it and enjoy. I hope I can bring a little bit of New Orleans to you here in DC today. Thanks for listening.